Today's lesson is properties of parallelograms. By definition, a parallelogram is a quadrilateral with both pairs of opposite sides parallel. So both sides of opposite sides that are parallel. So usually we use the symbol parallel looks like this or like this. Let's review a quadrilateral. Quad means four and lateral means side. So we're talking about four-sided polygons that have both pairs of opposite sides that are parallel. The symbol is what a parallelogram looks like. Okay, so there are 5 properties and conditions of a parallelogram. If I meet one of them, that means I'm a parallelogram. All right, so let's draw these conditions and properties on our parallelogram as we talk about it. So the definition says my opposite sides are parallel. Okay. So how do I show opposite sides parallel? We do that with arrows. When I have the same number of arrows, that means that I am parallel with that side. So I'm going to start out and say these two sides are parallel and these two sides are parallel. Okay, so the next is a condition. Parallelogram have opposite sides that are congruent. So the opposite sides are congruent. Oops. Why is it doing that? Opposite sides are congruent. Here we go. So to show congruent, we show tick marks. So here I got one set of tick marks and two set of tick marks. So these two sides are congruent, and these two sides are congruent. Okay, next condition, parallelogram opposite angles theorem. So opposite angles are congruent. So opposite angles are congruent. So I show these with arc marks. So if I have one set, those angles are congruent. Two sets, those angles are congruent. So these two angles are congruent. And these two angles are congruent. Parallelogram consecutive angles theorem. So consecutive angles of a parallelogram are supplementary. So supplementary means when I add them together, they total 180. So this means I have one angle that has one arc mark and one angle that has two arc marks. So if I look at these two angles, if I add them together, they total 180. I look at these two angles, so consecutive means in a row. If I add these two angles together, they total 180. If I add these two angles together, these are consecutive angles. They total 180. And if I add these two angles together, they're consecutive angles. They total 180. So it doesn't matter which two consecutive angles I'm talking about. Two consecutive angles are supplementary. And then the last is my diagonals bisect each other. So my diagonals bisect each other. Oh, big purple. Here we go. Bisect. So bisect means they cut each other in half. So again, when they're cut in half, they're going to be equal to each other. but in halves, but they're not going to be equal to each other. So this diagonal, so from one non-consecutive vertex to another, bisects this diagonal. So these two segments are congruent, and these two segments are congruent. Okay, so let's apply these. Let's apply these properties. Find the values of x and y. So I know I have a parallelogram because I have my opposite sides are parallel. That's the definition of the parallelogram. So if my opposite sides are parallel and my opposite angles are parallel, so I can set up an equation for x to say, because I know my opposite sides are congruent, so x plus 4 equals 12. So I'm going to add the inverse. So x equals 8 is one of the variables. And I also know my opposite angles are congruent, so I know y equals 65. Since it's an angle at 65 degrees. All right, so can you pause the video and try the next example? How'd you do? I know I have a parallelogram because my opposite sides are parallel. So my opposite sides are congruent, so I can say y plus 3 equals 18. So I'm going to add the inverse, which is -3. I get y equals 15. And my opposite angles are congruent. So 2x equals 50. So I'm going to divide by the coefficient next to the variable. So I get x equals 25. How did you do? All right, let's try applying several things or solving for several things on one parallelogram. In parallelogram CDEF, segment DE is 74 millimeters. Segment DG is 31 millimeters. And I'm going to put this here so I know it's just this. And angle FCD, so FCD is 42 degrees. So I know from here to here is 42 degrees. Find the value of CF. Okay, so C2F, it's asking me to find the value of C2F. So since I know opposite sides are congruent, I know these are congruent. So if D to E is 74 millimeters, C to F is 74 millimeters. Next, I want to find from D to F. So D to G and G to F are congruent. So this is 31. So D to F is going to be 31 plus 31, which is 62 millimeters. Next, it's asking me to find for the angle EFC. So angle EFC, so it wants me to know what this consecutive angle is. So I know if I add my two angles together, they total 180 degrees. So I know this is going to be 180 minus 42 degrees, which is 138 degrees. So this is going to be 138 degrees. Okay, so let's continue. Let's try some with some algebra now. Those were with some whole numbers. In parallelogram WXYZ, find the value of YZ. So I want to know the value of YZ and the measure of angle X. And the measure of angle X. Okay, so since I know I have a parallelogram, it's telling me that. I know my opposite sides are congruent. So I can set up one equation with the sides and say that 6a plus 10 equals 8a minus 4. So I'm going to subtract 6a from both sides. So 10 equals 2a minus 4. I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So 14 equals 2a. I'm going to divide by 2. And I get a equals 7. So I don't want to know just a. So I want to substitute in. Oops. So I want to substitute in because I want to actually know what YZ is. So 8 times 7 is 56. Minus 4 is 52. Okay, so next I need to find the angle. Okay, so I have two angles given, and the angles are consecutive. So I know when I add my two angles together, they total 180 degrees. So my equation is going to be 18b minus 11 plus 9b plus 2 equals 180, because I have two consecutive angles. So when I add them together, they are supplementary. So the first thing I want to do is combine like terms. So 18b plus 9b is 27b. Negative 11 plus 2 is minus 9 equals 180. And I add the inverse, so I'm going to add 9 to both sides. So 27b equals 189. I'm going to divide by the coefficient next to the variable. So b equals 7. Okay, so now I know what b is. So I can go substitute b into this expression. So 9 times 7 is 63, plus 2 is 65 degrees. And I know that angle X and angle Z are congruent, so I know angle X is also 65 degrees. All right, can you pause the video and do number 5 and see how you do? All right, let's check. How did you do? In quadrilateral PQRS, find the distance from P to Q. And the measure of angle P. Okay. Okay, so since I know I have a parallelogram, by definition, my opposite sides are congruent. So I can set up my sides equation to say 7a equals 2a plus 12. So I'm going to subtract 2a from both sides. So I get 5a equals 12. Divide both sides by 5. And I get a equals 2.4. So now that I know what a is, I can go substitute. So substituting in 7 times 2.4, I get 16.8 for Q to P. Okay, so let's solve for my angle. So I have two consecutive angles. So I know when I add my two angles together, they total 180. So my equation is 10b minus 16 plus 9b plus 25 equals 180. I want to combine like terms. So 10b plus 9b is 19b. And negative 16 plus 25 is positive 9 equals 180. I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides. I get 19b equals 171. I'm going to divide both sides by 19. So I get b equals 9. So I am trying to solve for angle P, and I know angle P and angle R are congruent. So I'm going to substitute into angle R's equation. So I know 9 times 9 is 81, plus 25 is 106 degrees. That's it.